Hello, and welcome to Lore and Sleep. Tonight we travel to a cold, wet island at the edge of the known world, to the northern reaches of Roman Britain, where the empire's carefully ordered roads and forts finally gave way to mist-covered hills, dense forests, and tribes who had never fully bent the knee to Rome. We are going to the story of the 9th Legion, Legio the 9th Hispana, one of the most famous fighting units in the entire history of the Roman army, a legion with a long and distinguished record of service stretching back generations that marched north into the Caledonian hills sometime in the early 2nd century of the Common Era, and, according to a legend that has captivated readers and historians alike for nearly 2,000 years, was never definitively heard from again. This is the story of a mystery built on the edge of a solid historical fact, a genuine puzzle woven from fragmentary Roman records, absent inscriptions, and centuries of later speculation, storytelling, and outright invention. It is the story of what a Roman legion actually was: thousands of trained, disciplined men who carried the eagle standard that embodied the very soul and honor of their unit, and of what it meant in the value system of Rome for that eagle to be lost, and catastrophe considered so severe that the very number of a disgraced legion might be permanently struck from the army's rolls rather than dishonored further by continued use. It is a story that has been reshaped and reimagined again and again by Victorian antiquarians, by 20th century novelists, and by modern archaeologists, patiently sifting through the actual, considerably murkier evidence, each generation finding in the vanished legion a blank space onto which to project its own fascination with lost causes, forgotten frontiers, and the fragile edges where even the greatest empires eventually meet their limits. It is a story that belongs to the night because so much of what we think we know about the 9th Legion is itself a kind of fog, a haze of legend settled over a genuine, still only partially resolved historical question. Let it come to you now, slowly, out of the mist rising from a cold northern hillside, the way it must have risen on countless mornings across 2,000 years of quiet, indifferent British weather. If these journeys bring you calm, I invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, or leave a quiet thought in the comments below. It helps others find their way here, one sleepy soul at a time. But for now, there is nothing you need to do. Let your body grow heavy. Let your breathing slow. Let the cold mist of a Roman frontier morning come to you out of the darkness, soft and gray, and settling quietly over a sleeping fortress. Let us begin. The Roman conquest of Britain began in earnest in the year 43 of the Common Era, when the Emperor Claudius, needing a decisive military triumph to secure his own uncertain political position after an unusual and unexpected rise to the imperial throne, launched a full invasion of the island under the command of the experienced General Aulus Plautius, landing a force of some 4 legions, along with a substantial complement of auxiliary troops, somewhere along the southeastern coast of what is now Kent. The invasion built on more than a century of prior Roman contact with Britain, stretching back to Julius Caesar's own 2 brief exploratory expeditions to the island in 55 and 54 before the Common Era, expeditions that had established trading and diplomatic relationships with several British tribes without ever attempting permanent conquest or occupation, a rather different and far more ambitious undertaking than what Claudius now set in motion nearly a century later. The invasion force that Aulus Plautius led ashore in. 43 consisted of 4 legions in total: the 2nd Augusta, the 9th Hispana, the 14th Gemina, and the 20th Valeria Victrix, each accompanied by roughly equal numbers of auxiliary troops, non-citizen soldiers recruited from across the wider empire, who served in specialized cavalry and light infantry units, providing the invading army with a combined fighting strength, according to modern historical estimates, working from the standard organizational tables of the period, of somewhere in the range of 40,000 men, a formidable concentration of military force for the conquest of a single island province, reflecting just how seriously Claudius and his advisors took the political stakes of the campaign's success. The invading army fought its way inland from the Kentish coast through a series of engagements, most significantly a hard-fought crossing of the River Medway against a coalition of British forces under the leadership of the Catuvalauni, tribal king Caratacus, and his brother Togodumnus, before advancing further to the River Thames, where, according to the Roman historian Cassius Dio, Claudius himself briefly traveled to Britain in person to lead the final assault on the British stronghold at Camulodunum, allowing the emperor to claim personal credit for completing the conquest's decisive opening phase before returning to Rome to celebrate an elaborate triumph. The advance across southern and eastern Britain in the years immediately following the invasion proceeded with the same disciplined, methodical efficiency that characterized Roman military conquest across the empire more broadly, defeating the forces of several British tribal confederations in a series of engagements, establishing forts and supply lines as the army advanced, and gradually extending direct Roman administrative control across what would eventually become the prosperous southern and eastern portions of the new province of Britannia. Yet Britain would never be conquered in the same complete, thoroughgoing sense that characterized Roman control over Gaul or Spain and the northern and western portions of the island, encompassing what is now Wales, northern England, and Scotland, remained, throughout the entire span of Roman rule, considerably more contested, more militarized, and more prone to periodic rebellion than the settled, increasingly Romanized South. It was into this genuinely contested frontier zone, a landscape of forested hills, exposed moorland, and tribal peoples who had not experienced anything remotely like the century of prior contact with Mediterranean civilization that had gradually softened resistance among Gallic and southern British populations, that the Roman legions stationed in Britain found themselves repeatedly deployed across the following decades. A Roman legion of this period typically comprised somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 heavy infantrymen, Roman citizens serving standard terms of 25 years, organized into 10 cohorts, and commanded by a legate, usually a senator, of considerable social standing, serving a temporary military command as one stage in a broader political career, supported by a professional cadre of centurions who provided the actual continuity of tactical experience and discipline that made the Roman legion such a formidable and consistently reliable fighting force across so many different theaters of war and so many changes of individual commander. Each legion also maintained its own baggage train, its own engineering and construction capabilities remarkable enough that Roman legionaries built roads, bridges, and entire fortified towns as a routine part of their ordinary service, rather than as any kind of specialized exception, and its own sacred standard. The eagle, Aquila, crafted from gold or gilded silver and mounted atop a pole, carried by a specially designated standard-bearer, the aquilifer, whose safekeeping of this symbol represented, in the deepest sense of Roman military culture, the living honor and continued existence of the legion itself, an object so sacred that its capture or loss by an enemy force constituted one of the single greatest catastrophes that could befall any Roman military unit, an event that Roman commanders would go to extraordinary, sometimes suicidal lengths to prevent or, failing prevention, to avenge and recover. Each legion also maintained its own baggage train, its own engineering and construction capabilities remarkable enough that Roman legionaries built roads, bridges, and entire fortified towns as a routine part of their ordinary service, rather than as any kind of specialized exception, and its own sacred standard, the eagle, aquila, crafted from gold or gilded silver and mounted atop a pole, carried by a specially designated standard-bearer, the aquilifer, whose safekeeping of this symbol represented, in the deepest sense of Roman military culture, the living honor and continued existence of the legion itself, an object so sacred that its capture or loss by an enemy force constituted one of the single greatest catastrophes that could befall any Roman military unit, an event that Roman commanders would go to extraordinary, sometimes suicidal lengths to prevent or, failing prevention, to avenge and recover. Below the aquilifer in ceremonial, if not always strict administrative importance, stood the various cohort and century standards, the signa, each bearing decorative discs recording the unit's particular battle honors and distinguishing emblems carried by standard-bearers, called signiferi, whose duties extended well beyond mere ceremony, since these same standards also served as the essential rallying points around which soldiers reformed their ranks amid the noise, dust, and confusion of actual battle, making the men who carried them figures of genuine tactical, as well as symbolic, importance within the legion's overall fighting structure. The command structure atop this organization placed a senatorial legate in overall charge, typically a man in his early 30s, pursuing the standard sequence of civil and military offices, the cursus honorum, that structured an ambitious Roman senator's public career, assisted by 6 military tribunes of varying seniority and experience, and by a camp prefect, praefectus castrorum, an older, highly experienced, former centurion who had risen through the ranks and who typically possessed, in practical terms, considerably more genuine tactical and logistical expertise than the more socially prestigious, but often militarily inexperienced senatorial officers technically ranked above him, a deliberate structural feature of Roman military organization that balanced aristocratic command prestige against the practical necessity of experienced, battle-tested leadership at the operational level where it actually mattered most. The legions stationed in Britain during the 1st and early 2nd centuries of the Common Era were rotated periodically between different provincial postings across the wider empire as strategic needs shifted, a pattern of movement that modern historians studying inscriptions, building records, and brick stamps have used to reconstruct, with varying degrees of confidence, which specific legions were stationed at which specific British forts, during which particular years, a puzzle considerably complicated by gaps in the surviving evidence, and by the simple fact that ancient administrative records kept on perishable materials like papyrus and wooden writing tablets have survived from Roman Britain in only the most fragmentary, and haphazard fashion compared to the more systematically preserved literary histories describing events elsewhere in the empire. These auxiliary units, unlike the legions themselves, were typically organized into smaller cohorts of around 500 men, sometimes supplemented by dedicated cavalry wings called alae, and were recruited from across the full breadth of the empire's conquered and allied peoples, meaning that a Roman fort in northern Britain might house, alongside its core of Italian or provincially recruited Roman legionaries, auxiliary soldiers originally drawn from Gaul, Spain, the Balkans, or even more distant regions, including Syria and North Africa, each unit often retaining, at least for a time, its own distinctive native fighting style, equipment, and even language, a genuinely multicultural composition to the Roman garrison of Britain that stands in some contrast to the more uniform popular image of Roman legionary conquest, and that meant the ordinary experience of encountering a Roman soldier on the northern British frontier might mean encountering someone whose own distant homeland was itself separated from Britain by the entire breadth of the known world. The religious world that Roman soldiers encountered upon arriving in Britain was one of considerable complexity and local variation, since the Celtic-speaking peoples of the island, much like their continental Gallic relatives, whom Julius Caesar had described in his own earlier military commentaries, maintained a rich pantheon of deities, closely tied to specific places, natural features, and tribal identities, rather than any single unified national religious system, a pattern of localized worship that meant a river, a spring, a particular hill, or grove might each carry its own sacred significance and its own associated deity or spirit, worshipped by the people living in that immediate territory, with rituals and traditions that could vary considerably from one tribal region to the next, even within a relatively small geographic area. The Druids, that famous priestly class, described with considerable fascination and no small amount of hostile exaggeration by Roman writers, including Julius Caesar himself, functioned across the Celtic world as religious leaders, judges, teachers, and repositories of oral tradition and law, wielding an authority that, according to Roman accounts, could transcend individual tribal boundaries, and that Roman administrators consequently viewed with genuine and lasting suspicion, since a religious authority capable of uniting otherwise fragmented and frequently rival tribes against a common outside threat represented exactly the kind of coordinating force that Rome's usual strategy of exploiting local political division could not easily counter or corrupt. Roman authorities pursued a sustained and often brutal campaign to suppress Druidic religious authority across the provinces of Gaul and Britain alike, culminating, according to the Roman historian Tacitus, in a decisive assault on the Druidic stronghold on the island of Mona, modern Anglesey, off the coast of northern Wales, in the year 60 of the Common Era. An attack the Roman general Suetonius Paulinus was actively conducting at the very moment that a far more serious crisis, the massive rebellion led by the British Queen Boudica, erupted disastrously behind his advancing army in the southeast of the province. Among the many deities worshipped across the diverse tribal landscape of pre-Roman and Roman-era Britain, certain figures recur across multiple regions with sufficient consistency that modern scholars consider them genuinely widespread, even if locally variable, features of the broader Celtic religious world. Epona, a goddess closely associated with horses and, by extension, with cavalry and safe travel, enjoyed particular popularity among Roman soldiers themselves, including cavalry units stationed in Britain, who adopted her worship with genuine enthusiasm despite her clearly non-Roman origins, a further example of the same pragmatic religious accommodation already discussed. Cernunnos, a horned god associated with wild animals, fertility, and the natural world, appears in artistic depictions across Britain and Gaul alike, seated cross-legged and often accompanied by a ram-horned serpent, though the surviving evidence for his specific mythology and ritual worship remains frustratingly fragmentary, pieced together largely from visual representations rather than any surviving native textual tradition, since the Celtic peoples of Britain, lacking their own developed writing system before Roman contact, left behind no equivalent to the rich mythological literature that survives from other ancient cultures. The physical landscape of pre-Roman and early Roman Britain was studded with hill forts, substantial earthwork and timber fortifications built atop defensible high ground across the island, structures that served simultaneously as defensive strongholds, centers of tribal political authority, and in some cases, significant settlements in their own right, with major examples including Maiden Castle in Dorset, representing some of the largest and most sophisticated earthwork fortifications constructed anywhere in prehistoric Europe. Many of these hill forts saw direct military action during the Roman conquest itself, most famously Maiden Castle, where the future Emperor Vespasian, then serving as legate of the Second Augusta Legion during the initial invasion campaign, is traditionally credited with capturing the fort after a hard-fought assault, archaeological evidence for which, including a scatter of Roman ballista bolts and a mass grave of native British dead showing clear signs of violent trauma, was recovered by 20th century excavation and long cited as dramatic physical confirmation of exactly this kind of conquest-era violence, even as more recent archaeological reassessment has introduced some genuine scholarly debate over the precise dating and interpretation of these same finds. Roman religious policy across the empire more broadly favored a considerable degree of pragmatic accommodation and syncretism with local deities, wherever such accommodation proved possible without threatening Roman political authority, a practice visible across Britain in numerous surviving inscriptions, dedicating altars and shrines to hybrid deities combining Roman and native British names and attributes, such as the goddess Sulis Minerva, worshipped at the thermal springs of Bath, where a native British deity, Sulis, associated with the healing properties of the site's naturally hot mineral waters, became formally identified with the Roman goddess Minerva, allowing both Roman soldiers and administrators and the native British population to worship at the same sacred site under names and rituals that each community could recognize as legitimately their own. Local water deities held particular significance within British religious practice, reflecting a widespread ancient reverence for springs, rivers, and wells as genuinely sacred boundary points between the ordinary human world and the divine, evidenced by the goddess Coventina, worshipped at a dedicated sacred well near Hadrian's Wall, where later excavation recovered an extraordinary hoard of votive offerings, including coins, jewelry, and carved altar stones cast into the water by generations of grateful or hopeful worshippers, both native British and Roman alike, and by the god Antinous, whose worship appears to have been entirely local to a single shrine near the fort of Conquest. Along the same wall, a genuinely obscure deity, known to modern scholars, from almost no source beyond the handful of inscriptions and a single distinctive stone head, recovered from his own small dedicated temple, a reminder of just how genuinely localized and multifarious the religious landscape of Roman Britain actually remained even centuries into the Roman occupation, never fully consolidated into any single unified provincial religious system, despite the broader empire's official cults and calendar. Ravens held a particular and enduring significance within British and wider Celtic religious and cultural symbolism, frequently associated with warfare, prophecy, and the presence of the supernatural on or near a battlefield, an association preserved in later medieval Welsh and Irish literary traditions, describing raven-associated deities and heroes, and one that later popular tradition, though without any secure ancient documentary basis specific to the 9th Legion itself, would eventually weave into the wider romantic legend of the vanished legion's final march northward into hostile, unmapped territory, ravens circling above a doomed column of marching soldiers becoming one of the most enduring and evocative visual images associated with the whole story in its many later fictional retellings. Roman soldiers stationed on the British frontier, meanwhile, maintained their own religious practices alongside this wider landscape of native British belief, worshipping the official state gods of Rome, including Jupiter, Mars, and the deified emperors, while also frequently adopting and adapting local deities and, particularly among soldiers recruited from the eastern provinces of the empire, bringing with them devotion to originally foreign cults, including that of Mithras, the mystery religion centered on a Persian-derived solar deity that became especially popular among Roman military personnel across the empire, with dedicated underground temples. Mithraea, established at several military sites in Britain, including the significant fort and settlement at Eboracum itself, evidence of the genuinely cosmopolitan and religiously diverse character of the Roman garrison population stationed along Britain's northern frontier. Eboracum, the Roman settlement that would eventually develop into the modern English city of York, was established as a legionary fortress in the year 71 of the Common Era, founded by the governor Quintus Petilius Carialis during a major push to extend Roman military control further into the northern reaches of the British province, a campaign that brought Roman power decisively into contact and conflict with the powerful northern tribal confederation known as the Brigantes, whose territory had previously maintained a somewhat looser, treaty-based relationship with Rome under a client queen named Cardimandua, before internal Brigantian political turmoil provoked more direct Roman military intervention. The site chosen for Eboracum, at the confluence of the rivers Ouse and Foss, offered considerable strategic advantages, including river access, allowing supplies and reinforcements to be moved efficiently by boat from the wider Roman logistical network, a defensible position, and proximity to the fertile agricultural land of the Vale of York, all factors that made it an obvious choice as the forward operating base from which Rome would conduct its subsequent military campaigns, further north into Brigantian territory, and, eventually, into the still more remote and less thoroughly Romanized regions of what is now Scotland. The fortress itself, built initially in timber and later substantially rebuilt in stone, followed the standard Roman legionary fortress plan, a rectangular enclosure surrounded by substantial defensive walls and ditches, its interior laid out on a precise grid pattern, housing barracks blocks for the legion soldiers, a headquarters building, granaries, workshops, a hospital, and the commanding officer's substantial residence, a fully self-contained military settlement capable of housing and sustaining several thousand soldiers, along with the considerable logistical apparatus their continued operation required. Around this military core, a substantial civilian settlement, a canabi, in the technical Roman terminology used for such garrison towns, grew up over subsequent decades, populated by merchants, craftsmen, and the wives and families of serving soldiers, since Roman legionaries, though technically forbidden from contracting legally recognized marriages during their period of active service, frequently formed lasting domestic partnerships with local women that Roman authorities increasingly tolerated, and eventually, upon a soldier's honorable discharge, after completing his term of service, formally recognized, creating over successive generations a genuinely mixed population of Roman military families with deep local roots extending well beyond the fortress walls themselves. The headquarters building, or Principia, stood at the physical and administrative heart of the fortress, housing the legion's shrine to its standards, the unit's strong room, where soldiers' savings and the legion's own treasury were kept under close guard, and the offices from which the legion's administrative staff managed everything from soldiers' pay records to correspondence with the wider provincial government, while a substantial bathhouse complex, reflecting the importance Roman culture placed on regular bathing as both hygienic practice and social ritual, provided soldiers with hot and cold bathing facilities, exercise areas, and informal social space, considerably more elaborate than the term bathhouse might suggest to modern ears, complete with underfloor heating systems, hypocausts that circulated hot air from wood-fired furnaces beneath raised floors and through hollow wall spaces to maintain comfortably warm rooms, even during the notoriously damp and chilly northern British winters. Eboracum's strategic importance to Roman Britain only grew across the following centuries, eventually hosting imperial visits from no less than two reigning emperors, Hadrian in the early 2nd century, whose visit directly preceded and likely helped motivate the construction of the Great Wall that would eventually bear his name, and later Septimius Severus, who established his imperial court at Eboracum for an extended period beginning in the year 208, while personally overseeing a major, ultimately not fully successful campaign against the Caledonian tribes further north, bringing with him not merely his army, but the full administrative apparatus of the imperial court itself, including his wife, the Empress Julia Domna, and his two sons and eventual co-heirs, Caracalla and Geta, whose already well-documented mutual hostility and rivalry, according to later Roman historians, only intensified during this extended northern sojourn, and who would, following their father's death at Eboracum itself in the year 211, return to Rome to begin the bitter and ultimately fatal power struggle between them that would shape the empire's subsequent history considerably more than their father's inconclusive Caledonian campaign ever did. Modern archaeological excavation beneath the streets and buildings of present-day York has recovered substantial physical evidence of Roman Eboracum's scale and sophistication, including sections of the fortress's stone defensive walls still visible today. Elaborate mosaic floors from wealthier residences in the surrounding civilian settlement, and a significant number of inscribed tombstones from the extensive Roman cemeteries that once surrounded the settlement, several of which specifically commemorate soldiers of various legions who died while stationed there, providing modern historians with genuinely valuable, if still frustratingly incomplete, physical evidence for the individual human lives, service records, and family circumstances of the soldiers who once called this northern frontier fortress home. Among the more evocative individual finds recovered from Roman Eboracum, modern excavation has uncovered a substantial collection of writing tablets, personal jewelry, and military equipment that together paint a genuinely vivid picture of daily garrison life, including a well-preserved iron sword still within its decorated scabbard. Recovered from the riverbed of the Ouse, tombstones commemorating individual soldiers by name, unit, and length of service, some accompanied by carved reliefs depicting the deceased in full military dress, and a particularly striking set of elaborate burials from the settlement's Roman-era cemeteries, including individuals of clearly high status, buried with imported goods from across the empire, evidence that has led some archaeologists to speculate, with appropriate caution given the inherent limits of skeletal and grave good analysis alone, that Eboracum's population included individuals of genuinely diverse geographic origin, some apparently born and raised in North Africa or the eastern Mediterranean provinces, before eventually making their way to this comparatively remote northern posting, a reminder of just how thoroughly interconnected and cosmopolitan the Roman imperial military system truly was, even at what might otherwise appear, from a narrowly local British perspective, to be one of its most peripheral and isolated frontier outposts. It was almost certainly from a fortress base very much like Eboracum, whether Eboracum itself in its earlier and less thoroughly developed form, or one of the other significant legionary fortresses established across northern Britain during the same general period that the 9th Legion would have launched whatever campaign or movement eventually led to the historical uncertainty surrounding its ultimate fate, and the archaeological and epigraphic evidence connecting the Legion specifically to Eboracum, while suggestive, remains, like so much else in this particular historical puzzle, considerably less definitive and complete than popular retellings of the story often assume or imply. Before ever setting foot in Britain, the 9th Legion had already accumulated a substantial record of military service across multiple provinces of the Roman Empire, a service history that later Roman soldiers and their commanders would have regarded as a source of considerable institutional pride and continuity, since Roman legions, unlike many other ancient military formations that dissolved and reformed with each new campaign, maintained continuous institutional identities, complete with their own accumulated battle honors, traditions, and internal esprit de corps across periods of active service that could stretch, in some cases, for centuries at a time. The Legion's association with Spain, reflected in its honorific title Hispana, most likely dated to its participation in the later stages of Rome's long and difficult conquest of the Iberian Peninsula during the final decades of the 1st century before the Common Era. Campaigns fought against determined native resistance in the rugged terrain of northwestern Spain that took Roman forces even at the height of Augustus's reorganized and professionalized imperial army, considerably longer to subdue than many other, seemingly more formidable adversaries elsewhere in the ancient Mediterranean world. Following the conclusion of these Spanish campaigns, available though admittedly fragmentary evidence, including inscriptions and brief references in surviving literary sources, suggest the legion subsequently served in various other provincial postings, including a period stationed in Pannonia, the Roman province, occupying territory in what is now Hungary and the surrounding Balkan region, before ultimately being transferred to Britain to participate in the Claudian invasion of 43 of the Common Era, or shortly thereafter. Legions of this general seniority and service record typically accumulated a range of honorific titles and decorations reflecting particular moments of distinguished service, and while the surviving evidence for the 9th Legion's own specific accumulated honors beyond its basic Hispana title remains somewhat sparse compared to some better documented contemporary units, the general pattern across the Roman army of this period suggests that a legion with such an extensive service record across Spain, Pannonia, and Britain would have developed a strong and genuinely cherished sense of its own particular institutional identity and accumulated battle history passed down through successive generations of officers and re-enlisted veteran soldiers in the same way that any long-serving military institution develops and maintains its own internal traditions, stories, and sense of continuous collective honor, extending well beyond the individual service of any single soldier or commanding officer at any given moment. Once established in Britain, the 9th Legion played a significant and, at certain critical moments, a genuinely precarious role in the ongoing Roman effort to consolidate control over the newly conquered province, most dramatically during the massive rebellion led by Boudica, queen of the Iceni tribe, in the year 60 or 61 of the Common Era, a catastrophic uprising triggered by Roman mistreatment of Boudica and her family following her husband's death, that saw rebel forces destroy the Roman settlements of Camulodunum, Londinium, and Verulamium in rapid succession, inflicting massive casualties on the Roman civilian population, before finally being decisively defeated in a pitched battle against the main Roman field army under the governor Suetonius Paulinus. The scale of destruction that Boudica's forces inflicted during the opening weeks of the rebellion was, by the standards of any Roman provincial uprising, genuinely extraordinary, with the Roman historian Tacitus recording that rebel forces killed as many as 70,000 Roman citizens and provincial allies across the 3 settlements they successively overran, figures that, even allowing for likely ancient exaggeration, testify to a level of popular fury and organized military coordination that caught Roman authorities in Britain almost entirely by surprise, since the rebellion erupted while the governor Suetonius Paulinus and the bulk of his available field army were occupied with the assault on the Druidic stronghold of Mona at the opposite end of the province, leaving the wealthy but only lightly defended settlements of the southeast dangerously exposed at exactly the moment Boudica's coalition chose to strike. Archaeological excavation beneath the modern cities of Colchester, London, and St. Albans has recovered a distinctive, thick layer of burned debris and ash dating precisely to this rebellion, a destruction layer that modern archaeologists have come to call the Boudican layer, providing physical confirmation considerably more visceral than any surviving written account of just how thoroughly and how suddenly these flourishing Roman settlements were reduced to ruin during those chaotic opening weeks of revolt. During the early, chaotic stages of this rebellion, a substantial detachment of the 9th Legion, marching to relieve the besieged settlement of Camulodunum, was itself ambushed and very severely mauled by Boudica's forces, suffering catastrophic losses among its infantry component. According to the account preserved by the Roman historian Tacitus, though the legion's cavalry contingent and its commanding officer at the time, a legate named Quintus Petilius Cerealis, managed to escape the disaster, and the unit was subsequently reinforced and rebuilt with fresh drafts of soldiers transferred from Roman forces stationed on the European continent, a demonstration of the Roman military system's genuine institutional resilience in absorbing even quite severe battlefield losses without permanently disbanding the affected unit. The Legion's period of service in Pannonia, prior to its eventual transfer to Britain, coincided with a broader Roman military buildup along the Danube frontier during the later years of Augustus's reign and the subsequent reign of Tiberius, a period that saw considerable Roman military effort directed at consolidating our control over the recently conquered Pannonian and Illyrian territories following a major and very serious regional revolt that had erupted in the year 6 of the Common Era, a rebellion so severe that the contemporary Roman historian Suetonius records the Emperor Augustus himself describing it as the most difficult conflict Rome had faced since the wars against Hannibal centuries earlier, a comparison that, whatever its precise rhetorical exaggeration, reflects just how seriously the Roman military establishment of the period regarded the sustained challenge of pacifying this particular frontier region, service that would have given the 9th Legion's soldiers and officers considerable practical experience in exactly the kind of grinding, attritional frontier warfare against determined local resistance that they would later encounter again in a rather different climate and landscape on the northern edges of Britain. This same Cerealis, having survived the Boudican disaster as a relatively young officer, would go on to a distinguished subsequent career, commanding Roman forces during the suppression of a major revolt on the Rhine frontier, led by the Batavian chieftain Civilis in the year 69, before eventually returning to Britain as provincial governor in the year 71, the very governor responsible for founding the fortress at Eboracum already described, suggesting a personal continuity of command experience and strategic vision connecting the 9th Legion's earlier, difficult experience during the Boudican Rebellion directly to the subsequent Roman push northward that would eventually bring the Legion into the more remote and less thoroughly documented frontier zone where its later, more mysterious fate would eventually unfold. The available Roman epigraphic record, meaning surviving inscriptions on stone monuments, building dedications, and military diplomas, places the 9th Legion at Eboracum with reasonable confidence through at least the year 108 of the Common Era, based on a building inscription from that specific year recording the Legion's participation in reconstructing the fortress's stone defenses, the last securely dated piece of direct physical evidence for the Legion's continued existence and activity in Britain that has yet been recovered by modern archaeological investigation. The decades following the establishment of Eboracum as a forward legionary base saw sustained Roman military effort directed at extending direct control over the still, largely independent tribal peoples of what is now Scotland, a campaign most closely associated with the governorship of Gnaeus Julius Agricola, who held the post from around 77 to 84 of the Common Era, and whose military and administrative career was celebrated in a laudatory biography written by his own son-in-law, the historian Tacitus, a work that, while clearly shaped by considerable filial devotion and consequent bias in Agricola's favor, nonetheless provides by far the most detailed surviving narrative account of Roman military operations in northern Britain. During this crucial period, Agricola's campaigns pushed Roman forces further north than they had ever previously ventured, constructing a network of forts and roads across what is now central and northern Scotland, and culminating, according to Tacitus's account, in a decisive pitched battle at a location called Mons Graupius, fought in the year 83 or 84 against a large coalition of Caledonian tribes under a leader named Calgacus, whose defiant pre-battle speech, as recorded, or more likely substantially composed, by Tacitus himself in the elaborate rhetorical tradition of ancient historical writing, includes the famously bitter observation that where the Romans created a desolate wasteland, they called it peace, a line that has echoed through subsequent literature and political rhetoric as one of the most memorable ancient critiques of imperial conquest ever recorded, regardless of whether the actual historical Calgacus ever spoke anything resembling these particular words. Agricola's campaigns were notable not only for their overland military operations, but also for a genuinely ambitious complementary naval effort, since Tacitus records that Agricola dispatched a Roman fleet to explore and map the coastline of northern Britain, an expedition that, according to Tacitus's account, succeeded in circumnavigating the entire island for the first time in recorded history, confirming Britain's insular geography beyond any remaining doubt, and even reportedly citing, though not landing upon, the Orkney Islands off Scotland's far northern coast, a genuinely remarkable feat of ancient naval exploration that speaks to the considerable logistical and geographic ambition underlying Rome's northern British campaigns during this period, even as the practical military value of this naval reconnaissance ultimately proved considerably more limited than the overland campaigns it was intended to support. The Caledonian tribes that Roman forces encountered in their push northward fought according to a style of warfare considerably different from the more heavily armored, close formation infantry tactics that characterized Roman legionary combat, relying instead on chariots still in active military use in northern Britain, considerably after their obsolescence elsewhere in the Roman world, along with fast-moving infantry skirmishers wielding long slashing swords and javelins, tactics well suited to the region's difficult terrain of dense forest, boggy moorland, and steep hillsides, where the Roman legion's usual advantages of disciplined, heavy infantry formation fighting could not always be brought to bear as effectively as on open ground, a persistent tactical challenge that helps explain why Rome's ultimately successful tactical victories in the region, including the reported triumph at Mons Graupius itself, never translated into the kind of lasting, stable territorial control that Roman forces had more readily achieved across the gentler, more thoroughly Romanized landscape of southern Britain, beyond the network of roads and fortified camps established across the more accessible lowland regions of conquered Scotland, Roman military planners under Agricola and his immediate successors also constructed a distinctive chain of smaller forts positioned specifically to block the mouths of the narrow highland glens through which Caledonian raiding parties might otherwise descend into the more settled lowland territory that Rome had more securely brought under its control, a defensive strategy reflecting careful Roman appreciation of the region's genuinely difficult topography and the practical military limits it imposed on any occupying force attempting to hold the whole of the Scottish Highlands by direct garrison alone, rather than simply through periodic punitive campaigns launched from more secure bases further south whenever Caledonian unrest grew serious enough to demand a renewed military response. Despite this reported decisive victory at Mons Graupius, the Roman position in the far north of Scotland ultimately proved impossible to sustain over the following years, and Agricola's successors, faced with the practical, logistical difficulties of supplying and defending an extended frontier deep in genuinely hostile and economically unrewarding territory, combined with shifting strategic priorities elsewhere across the wider Roman Empire, gradually withdrew Roman forces back to more defensible and more easily supplied positions considerably further south, a pattern of advance and subsequent retreat that would repeat itself in various forms across the following decades of Roman engagement with the Caledonian frontier, reflecting a persistent and never fully resolved Roman strategic dilemma over just how much of Britain's difficult, resource-poor northern reaches were genuinely worth the ongoing military investment required to hold them permanently. It was within this broader context of intermittent, unresolved frontier warfare against determined and evidently resilient Caledonian tribal opposition that later Roman sources, admittedly fragmentary and often frustratingly vague on precise dates and specific details, described renewed and evidently quite serious military difficulties in northern Britain during the early years of the Emperor Hadrian's reign. Beginning in the year 117, difficulties serious enough that later Roman literary sources, including a brief and tantalizingly imprecise reference in the collection of later imperial biographies known as the Historia Augusta, describe the Britons as having thrown off Roman control entirely in this period, language suggesting a major uprising or military reversal, considerably more serious than routine frontier skirmishing, though the specific details, scale, and ultimate resolution of whatever crisis this fragmentary reference actually describes remain frustratingly obscure to modern historians working from the surviving evidence. It is precisely into this genuine, if frustratingly underdocumented, period of renewed frontier crisis in northern Britain during the early years of Hadrian's reign that the last securely dated evidence for the 9th Legion's continued existence, the year 108 inscription from Eboracum already discussed, gives way to an evidentiary silence that has, ever since antiquarians and historians first began seriously examining the question in the modern era, provided fertile ground for the enduring popular legend that the Legion met some catastrophic and total destruction somewhere in the mist-shrouded hills of Caledonia during exactly this period of documented but frustratingly vague renewed frontier warfare. The daily existence of an ordinary Roman legionary stationed at a frontier fortress like Eboracum combined long periods of routine garrison duty, construction work, and administrative labor with comparatively brief and infrequent, though obviously far more dangerous periods of actual combat, a rhythm of military service considerably closer in its actual daily texture to that of a permanent, highly organized construction and administrative workforce than to the popular modern image of near-constant battlefield action that the more dramatic historical episodes tend to emphasize in popular retelling. A legionary's standard equipment, largely standardized across the whole of the Roman army by this period, though subject to some regional and individual variation, included segmented iron plate armor, known to modern scholars by the Latin term lorica segmentata, a curved rectangular shield, a short thrusting sword called a gladius, particularly well suited to the close, disciplined formation, fighting that characterized Roman infantry tactics, a pair of javelins called pila, designed to disable an enemy's shield upon impact before close engagement began, and a bronze helmet providing protection while still allowing the wearer reasonable peripheral vision and hearing, equipment that a soldier was personally responsible for maintaining in good working order, with the cost of replacement or repair typically deducted directly from his regular pay. Legionary pay itself, while modest by later standards, provided a genuinely attractive and stable career path for Roman citizens, particularly those from more modest social backgrounds, seeking a route toward eventual financial security, land ownership, and Roman citizenship privileges upon completing the standard 25-year term of service, since discharged veterans typically received either a substantial cash payment or a grant of agricultural land, frequently in a specifically designated veteran colony established for exactly this purpose, along with the formal legal privileges attached to Roman citizenship for those recruited from provincial populations that had not previously held full citizen status, a genuinely significant inducement that helps explain why the Roman army, despite its demanding conditions of service, generally had little difficulty recruiting sufficient numbers of willing volunteers across most of its long imperial history. Beyond their construction and administrative duties, legionary soldiers stationed at a frontier fortress maintained a rigorous, ongoing training regimen intended to preserve exactly the disciplined tactical cohesion that gave Roman infantry its consistent battlefield advantage over less uniformly drilled opponents, including regular weapons practice against wooden training posts, considerably heavier than a soldier's actual issued weapons, in order to build strength and proper technique. Formation drills practiced repeatedly until the complex maneuvers required for battlefield cohesion became genuinely automatic even amid the chaos and noise of actual combat, and route marches carrying full equipment and supplies over considerable distances, a demanding physical regimen that Roman military writers of the period, including the later compiler Vegetius, drawing on considerably older source material, explicitly credited as the single most important factor underlying Roman military success across the empire's long history of conquest, more significant in their explicit judgment than either superior numbers or superior individual weaponry alone. The garrison town that grew up around a major legionary fortress like Eboracum supported a substantial and economically diverse civilian population well beyond the soldiers themselves, including merchants supplying goods ranging from wine and olive oil imported from the Mediterranean core of the empire to locally produced pottery, leather goods, and metalwork, along with a considerable number of specialized craftsmen, innkeepers, and the previously mentioned informal wives and families of serving soldiers, creating a genuinely cosmopolitan settlement whose material culture, as revealed through modern archaeological excavation, reflects trading connections extending across the entire breadth of the Roman Empire, with pottery, coins, and other artifacts recovered from Eboracum and comparable British military sites originating from locations as distant as North Africa, Gaul, and the eastern Mediterranean provinces. The extensive network of Roman roads that soldiers themselves constructed across Britain, engineered with a characteristic Roman insistence on straight, carefully surveyed routes wherever terrain permitted, and built up in layers of compacted stone and gravel over a properly drained foundation, served a function considerably beyond simple troop movement, becoming the essential arteries along which the entire provincial economy, official government communications, and ordinary civilian trade and travel all depended, a genuinely transformative piece of infrastructure whose basic roots, in many cases, continue to shape the pattern of British road networks for well over 1,000 years after the Roman legions themselves had departed the island entirely. Among the specific goods that archaeological excavation has recovered in abundance at Eboracum and comparable British military sites, fine red-glazed pottery known as terra sigillata, manufactured in specialized workshops in Gaul and shipped across the English Channel in enormous quantities, appears with particular frequency, alongside amphorae that once carried olive oil from Spain, wine from Gaul and Italy, and a fermented fish sauce called garum, produced primarily in coastal Spanish and North African workshops that served as a ubiquitous seasoning across the entire Roman world, in much the way that soy sauce or similar fermented condiments function in various cuisines today, evidence that even soldiers stationed at what was, from the perspective of the Mediterranean core of the empire, a genuinely remote and unglamorous frontier posting, nonetheless maintained access to a recognizably Roman diet and material culture, imported across truly enormous distances by the empire's remarkably extensive and well-organized commercial shipping networks, discharged veterans who chose to settle in Britain rather than returning to their original home provinces frequently did so in dedicated veteran colonies, coloniae, established at locations including Camulodunum, Glevum, and Lindum, planned settlements laid out on the same grid pattern as a military fortress, granting former soldiers formal plots of agricultural land, along with the full legal and social privileges of Roman citizenship, creating stable communities of experienced, loyal former military men whose continued presence provided the province with a reliable reserve of trained manpower and, not incidentally, a demographic bulwark of settlers with every practical incentive to support continued Roman rule against any future native unrest, a deliberate colonization strategy that Rome employed with considerable consistency across many of its frontier provinces. Religious and social life within these garrison communities combined the official state religious calendar with its regular festivals honoring Rome's traditional gods and the reigning emperor's own divine associations, alongside the considerably more informal and personally meaningful private devotional practices, recreational activities, including gambling with dice and gaming pieces recovered in substantial quantities by modern archaeologists at military sites across Britain, and the ordinary domestic concerns of family life, illness, and mortality that shaped the lived daily experience of both soldiers and civilians alike within these frontier communities in ways that the more dramatic military and political narrative of Roman Britain's conquest and eventual mysterious frontier crises can sometimes obscure or overshadow entirely the popular legend of the Ninth Legion's total destruction somewhere in the wilds of Caledonia, an episode of catastrophic military disaster in which an entire legion of several thousand soldiers, along with its sacred eagle standard, was supposedly annihilated to the very last man by hostile northern tribes, achieved its widest popular circulation, not through any ancient historical source explicitly describing such an event in these specific dramatic terms, but rather through a combination of the genuine, evidentiary silence surrounding the legion after its last securely dated inscription in the year 108, and, considerably more directly, through the enormous popular success of later literary and cinematic retellings, most famously, the British author Rosemary Sutcliffe's celebrated 1954 novel, imagining the fate of the Legion's lost eagle standard and the efforts of a later Roman officer to recover it, a work of historical fiction whose vivid, emotionally compelling narrative has done more than any strictly academic historical source to fix the image of the Ninth Legion's total, tragic annihilation in the popular imagination across subsequent generations of readers. The actual ancient evidentiary record, examined with appropriate scholarly caution, supports a considerably more uncertain and less dramatically conclusive picture than this popular legend suggests. The Legion's absence from the later, considerably better documented list of legions stationed in Britain during the reign of Hadrian, a list preserved through the survival of a bronze military diploma dated to the year 122, has traditionally been cited as key evidence for its destruction sometime in the intervening years, since the Legion's name simply fails to appear where a continuously serving unit would ordinarily be expected. But modern historians have increasingly emphasized several alternative explanations for this same evidentiary gap that do not require assuming a single catastrophic destruction in Caledonia specifically. One prominent alternative theory holds that the Ninth Legion was not destroyed in Britain at all, but rather transferred out of the province entirely to serve elsewhere in the empire, a redeployment that would leave essentially the same kind of gap in the specifically British inscriptional record without requiring any catastrophic military disaster whatsoever. Supporting this alternative possibility, a small number of tile stamps and building inscriptions bearing the Ninth Legion's name have been discovered at the site of Nijmegen in the Netherlands, in the Roman province of Germania Inferior, dating to a period that some scholars place after the Legion's last confirmed British inscription, suggesting the unit may have been transferred to the Rhine frontier to help address military needs in that different, and during this general period genuinely more strategically pressing, sector of the wider empire, before potentially being destroyed at some later date and in some entirely different theater of conflict, possibly during the serious Jewish revolt against Roman rule in Judea during the early 130s, or alternatively during renewed and considerably more thoroughly documented Roman military difficulties along the eastern frontier against the Parthian Empire. During the following decades, the Ninth Legion is far from the only Roman military unit whose ultimate fate remains genuinely uncertain in the surviving historical record, a fact that modern historians studying the question often emphasize as useful context for resisting the temptation to assume any single dramatic explanation must apply. Rome maintained, at any given time across its long imperial history, somewhere between 25 and 30 legions, and the complete roster of units in existence at one point in time frequently differs, upon careful comparison, from rosters compiled at later dates for reasons that historians have traced, in cases where sufficient evidence survives to allow confident tracing at all, to a genuinely wide range of causes including battlefield destruction, but also simple renaming, administrative merger with other depleted units, and the quiet, undramatic disbandment of legions that had simply become too depleted or too unreliable to justify the continued expense of maintaining them at full established strength. A reminder that the disappearance of a legion's name from the official record need not, and quite often did not, indicate any single catastrophic military event at all. The Nijmegen tile stamp evidence, while genuinely suggestive of at least a partial transfer of 9th Legion personnel or equipment to the Rhine frontier, itself comes with important scholarly caveats that responsible historians are careful to note, since the precise dating of these stamped tiles remains subject to some genuine archaeological uncertainty, and it remains entirely possible that they reflect only a smaller detachment of the legion rather than its full remaining strength. Having been transferred to Germania, while a reduced or entirely different remnant of the unit's official establishment continued, at least briefly, in some diminished form in Britain itself, a nuanced possibility that considerably complicates any attempt to construct a single, tidy narrative explaining the legion's ultimate fate from this evidence alone. The Jewish revolt theory in particular draws on the genuinely severe and well-documented scale of Roman military losses during the Bar Kokhba revolt in Judea, which erupted in the year 132 and required Rome to concentrate an unusually large number of legions and auxiliary units to finally suppress, at a cost in Roman casualties, serious enough that the Emperor Hadrian, in his subsequent report to the Senate, reportedly omitted the traditional opening formula, hoping that he and the army were in good health, a conspicuous departure from standard imperial communication protocol that ancient sources cite as clear evidence of just how costly and hard-fought this particular Eastern campaign had actually proven, making it a genuinely plausible, if still entirely unconfirmed, by any direct inscriptional evidence specifically naming the 9th Legion, in this Eastern context, candidate theater for the unit's ultimate destruction, if it had indeed been transferred east from its earlier Rhine posting by this point. The alternative possibility of destruction during subsequent Roman conflict with the Parthian Empire, Rome's perennial rival along its eastern frontier, rests on somewhat less specific evidentiary grounding still, essentially an inference from the legion's general disappearance from the surviving record, combined with the simple fact that renewed Roman-Parthian warfare did occur at various points during the middle decades of the 2nd century without any currently known inscription or literary reference directly connecting the 9th Legion specifically to any of these particular Eastern campaigns. Other historians have proposed still further alternative explanations, including the possibility that the Legion was not dramatically destroyed at all, but rather gradually disbanded through the entirely mundane, administratively unremarkable process of its soldiers simply completing their terms of service without sufficient fresh recruitment to maintain the unit at effective operational strength. a quiet institutional dissolution, considerably less dramatic than annihilation in battle, but consistent with the same basic evidentiary pattern of a legion simply ceasing to appear in subsequent official records without any single catastrophic battle or destruction event necessarily having occurred at all. The genuine scholarly uncertainty surrounding all these competing explanations, none of which can currently be confirmed with full documentary certainty, given the fragmentary nature of the surviving ancient evidence, is itself among the most historically interesting features of the entire Ninth Legion mystery, a case study in just how much of even quite significant ancient historical events can remain genuinely unresolved, contested, and dependent on careful, necessarily provisional interpretation of scattered and incomplete physical and documentary evidence recovered many centuries after the fact. The genuine scholarly uncertainty surrounding all these competing explanations, none of which can currently be confirmed with full documentary certainty, given the fragmentary nature of the surviving ancient evidence, is itself among the most historically interesting features of the entire Ninth Legion mystery, a case study in just how much of even quite significant ancient historical events can remain genuinely unresolved, contested, and dependent on careful, necessarily provisional interpretation of scattered and incomplete physical and documentary evidence recovered many centuries after the fact. Professional historians who have devoted entire careers to studying this single question generally caution against the temptation to settle on any one explanation with more confidence than the actual surviving evidence genuinely supports. A discipline of intellectual honesty that, however less satisfying than a single dramatic answer, reflects the same careful, evidence-based approach that ultimately makes the wider study of ancient history a genuinely rigorous field of inquiry, rather than simply an exercise in retelling whichever version of events happens to make the best story. Hadrian's Wall, construction of which began around the year 122 and continued over the following several years, stretched for some 73 Roman miles across the narrowest width of northern Britain, from the Solway Firth in the west to the mouth of the River Tyne in the east, an engineering achievement of extraordinary scale and ambition, incorporating mile castles, observation towers, and larger auxiliary forts positioned at regular intervals along its entire length, garrisoned by auxiliary troops drawn from across the wider Roman Empire, rather than by the legionary heavy infantry units that remained concentrated at the larger fortress bases considerably further south, including, throughout this later period, at Eboracum itself, where whatever legion had by this point replaced the 9th in the garrison rolls, most likely the 6th Legion Victrix, transferred into Britain from the Rhine frontier at approximately this same time, continued the same essential fortress function that the 9th itself had previously performed. The wall's construction and its subsequent centuries of continued operation and periodic modification, including a further, more northerly, and ultimately unsustained forward advance under the later Emperor Antoninus Pius, that produced a second, shorter fortified line, the Antonine Wall, considerably further north, before Roman forces were once again compelled to withdraw back to Hadrian's original line within only a couple of decades, represent the physical, enduring monument to Rome's ultimately unsuccessful, centuries-long effort to fully subdue the whole of the British Isles, an effort in which the Ninth Legion's own service and its own still genuinely uncertain final fate represents merely one especially evocative and historically resonant episode within a much longer and more broadly contested frontier history. The enduring popular fascination with the Ninth Legion's disappearance, considerably disproportionate to the actual, still frustratingly uncertain, historical evidence directly documenting the event, speaks to something genuinely universal in how later generations have continued to engage with and reimagine the ancient past, a fascination with lost causes, vanished armies, and the fragile, permeable edges, where even history's most powerful and best documented empires eventually meet forces, whether military, environmental, or simply administrative and demographic, that they cannot fully master or control. Rosemary Sutcliff's novel and the numerous subsequent films, television adaptations, and further works of historical fiction it directly inspired across the following decades, transformed a genuine but genuinely uncertain historical puzzle into one of the most beloved and enduring stories of the entire Roman imperial frontier, a testament to the particular narrative power that a well-told story of loss, mystery, and quiet endurance can hold over successive generations of readers and audiences, regardless of how precisely or imprecisely that story ultimately maps onto the considerably murkier and more provisional actual historical record. The wall's construction and its subsequent centuries of continued operation and periodic modification, including a further, more northerly, and ultimately unsustained forward advance under the later Emperor Antoninus Pius, beginning around the year 142, which produced a second, shorter fortified line, the Antonine Wall, built primarily of turf, rather than Hadrian's wall's more substantial stone construction, stretching across the considerably narrower waste of central Scotland between the Firth of Forth and the Firth of Clyde, a genuinely ambitious, renewed attempt to push the effective frontier of Roman control back northward that nonetheless proved impossible to sustain over the following decades, with Roman forces withdrawing back to Hadrian's original, more defensible line within only about 20 years, abandoning the Antonine Wall entirely by around the year 162 in a further, quieter, but no less significant demonstration of the same fundamental strategic limitation that had shaped Roman engagement with the Caledonian frontier since the earliest campaigns of Agricola nearly a century before. The enduring popular fascination with the Ninth Legion's disappearance has found expression well beyond Rosemary Sutcliff's original novel, inspiring subsequent film and television adaptations across the following decades, including several feature film versions produced in the early 21st century that brought the story to considerably wider international audiences than the original novel alone had ever reached, along with numerous further works of historical fiction, documentary treatments, and even video games drawing on the same evocative premise of a lost legion vanishing into the northern mists, a testament to the particular narrative power that a well-told story of loss, mystery, and quiet endurance can hold over successive generations of readers and audiences, regardless of how precisely or imprecisely that story ultimately maps onto the considerably murkier and more provisional actual historical record that this episode has tried, with appropriate scholarly caution, to lay out honestly rather than simply repeating the more dramatic but less well-evidenced popular version of events. Modern archaeologists studying this same frontier landscape today increasingly rely on non-invasive survey techniques, including aerial and satellite photography, geophysical, ground-penetrating survey, and, in more recent years, LiDAR laser scanning capable of revealing the faint, otherwise invisible traces of ancient earthworks, marching camps, and road alignments still preserved beneath centuries of subsequent agricultural use and vegetation growth across the Scottish and Northern English countryside, techniques that have allowed researchers to identify a considerably larger network of temporary Roman marching camps across Scotland than had previously been recognized through traditional excavation alone, each camp representing a single overnight halt during some now largely undocumented Roman military campaign, evidence of a scale and frequency of Roman military activity in the region that continues to expand modern understanding of just how extensively, if ultimately unsuccessfully, Rome attempted to bring the whole of Caledonia under lasting control across these repeated but never fully conclusive campaigns. Modern archaeological investigation continues, gradually and often frustratingly slowly, to add new pieces to this still incomplete historical puzzle. As ongoing excavation at Eboracum itself, at sites further north into Scotland, where Roman military activity during the relevant period has left its own scattered material traces, and at other locations across the wider Roman Empire, where the 9th Legion's name has left occasional epigraphic traces, continues to refine and periodically to complicate rather than simply resolve the wider scholarly understanding of exactly what happened to this once celebrated fighting unit during the crucial and still only partially documented years following its last secure historical appearance in the year 108. The mist that settles over the hills of northern England and southern Scotland on a quiet morning today falls across essentially the same landscape, the same rivers, and very often the same stone foundations that Roman soldiers once marched across, built upon, and, in at least some considerable and genuinely uncertain number of cases, never returned from, a landscape that holds its own scattered, incomplete, and endlessly evocative physical testimony to a frontier history that remains, in its most human and most personally affecting details, genuinely and perhaps permanently unresolved, an unusually honest reminder that not every ancient story, however deeply and however understandably we might wish otherwise, actually comes with a clear, documented, and fully satisfying ending, and that this quiet, ordinary honesty about the limits of what we can truly know is, in its own way, as valuable a gift as any tidy resolution could ever be. And so, we leave the story of the 9th Legion resting in the mist of nearly 2,000 years. We walked the roads and the fortress walls of Roman Britain from the initial Claudian invasion and the hard-fought crossing of the Medway, through the long, difficult decades of frontier warfare against Caledonian tribes who never fully submitted to Roman authority. We stood at Eboracum, watching a modest timber legionary fortress grow across generations into a genuinely cosmopolitan frontier city that would one day even host a reigning emperor's own household and court. And we followed the 9th Legion itself through its own earlier trials across Spain and Pannonia and Britain alike, its near destruction during Boudica's rebellion, its steady and patient rebuilding, and its last securely documented moment, a simple building inscription dated to the year 108, carved into stone by soldiers who could have had no idea that this modest, routine record would eventually become the final solid ground beneath one of history's most enduring frontier mysteries. we considered the genuine competing theories: transfer to the Rhine, quiet administrative dissolution, destruction in some entirely different and better documented Eastern campaign. Each one a serious, evidence-based possibility that modern historians continue to weigh against the others without any final, universally accepted resolution, a genuinely honest uncertainty that this episode has tried to preserve rather than smoothing over, in favor of whichever version of the story happens to feel most satisfying to tell. And we stood at the very end, beside Hadrian's Great Wall itself, a monument not to total conquest, but to a considered, permanent, and ultimately quite practical decision about exactly where an empire's ambitions must yield to the harder, more stubborn realities of geography, logistics, and a people who simply would not be fully subdued. These are human stories. The legionaries were human, whatever ultimately became of them, and so were the Caledonian tribespeople who resisted them, and the mystery that time has left behind is, in its own quiet way, as human and as unresolved as any of the certainties this podcast has told you. Across every other episode, soldiers who marched north under that eagle standard had names, families waiting somewhere far to the south, favorite meals, old friendships forged over years of shared hardship, worries about pay and promotion, and the length of years still left before an honorable discharge, all of it as ordinary and as real as anything in any other century, even though almost none of those small personal details survive for us now beyond the barest outline of a legion's name appearing and then quietly no longer appearing. In the surviving fragments of an empire's careful but incomplete written record. If this journey brought you some calm, you might like the video, or subscribe to the channel, or leave a small quiet comment below. It helps others find their way here, and every person who finds their way here is one more person sleeping a little more gently tonight. There is another story waiting for you on the screen. You can simply let it play and let the night continue and let the ancient world keep talking in its old slow voice. But for now, there is nothing left to follow. The fortress gates are closed. The mist has settled low over the northern hills. The eagle, wherever it finally came to rest, is silent now. Let your jaw unclench. Let your shoulders drop. Let your hands open slowly. The way hands open when a long march has finally ended and there is nowhere further left to go. Let your breathing find its own quiet rhythm, slow and steady, in and out, like the mist drifting slowly across a sleeping frontier, patient and old, and entirely at peace with whatever answer it may or may not ever give up. Somewhere beneath the fields and hillsides of northern England and southern Scotland, buried ditches, vanished timber palisades, and the scattered, silent debris of long-abandoned marching camps still wait, patient and largely unread, for whatever future survey or excavation might next bring a small additional fragment of this old, unfinished story back into the light. Sleep well and good night. Wherever in this quiet, wide world tonight's old story finds you resting,